Welcome back to Turkish Spotlight Secrets, the digital hideaway where the sheen of show business gets peeled back and the untidy, breathing truth is allowed to stand in the light. We don't glide over headlines here, we wade into the feelings behind them. Today we walk into a story as delicate as chiffon and as strong as steel, a door that Hazal opened not with spectacle but with courage. This is a path of vulnerability, endurance, and that slow, meticulous work we call healing. Before we step into that space, make your place in our circle secure. Subscribe, tap the bell, and if you believe in storytelling that respects the human soul more than shock value, consider joining as a member. Your support keeps this heart beating and makes room for stories that breathe. Now, center yourself, take in a steady breath, and step into Hazal's world with me. The confession didn't arrive wrapped in glossy filters or a manicured statement. It slipped out plain and unvarnished, as if she set a heavy stone down with both hands. Her voice was steady, but her eyes carried years. She said that when her emotions surge, she looks for something to taste, to hold, to ground herself. It wasn't a talking point meant for fashion covers. It landed like truth, tender, unguarded, undeniably human. With that simple admission, Hazal didn't start a trend. She sent a thread across the room and tied it to everyone who's ever used a familiar flavor to calm a private ache. She cracked open the vault of 2022, a year she doesn't count in days so much as in lessons that cut and then taught. And she told us how her latest project, The Eighth Family, became the furnace where sharp edges were melted down and forged into something steady. From far away, 2022 looked like a victory reel. Elegant photos beaming from premieres, headlines in bright fonts, calendars filled to the edges. But the brightest lights make the longest shadows, and inside those shadows the air can get cold. When her much-discussed period drama launched on a global streaming platform, the initial applause crashed into a wave of commentary that chilled the room. It wasn't measured critique. It felt theatrical in its harshness, the sort of barbs typed by people who forget there's a person on the other side of the screen. Some called her work overly mannered, others said the scale of the show devoured her. The loudest voices tried to set borders around her talent, and there was a moment, dizzy, tilted, when Hazal felt reality slip a few inches away from her grasp. She remembers one afternoon when the room felt like a ship's deck in a storm, and even breathing. That automatic rhythm had to be managed by conscious will. In that swirl, a sentence from her therapist took root and refused to be uprooted. It wasn't a spell, and it didn't silence the world. But it gave shape to her pain. It sounded like this: it's hard, and it is happening. Take hope seriously. Be brave in small ways. Let time do its job. Practice patience as if it's a craft. She holds that line now the way one might hold a photograph that doesn't fade. Those words didn't erase the noise, but they labeled it, and by naming it, they loosened its grip. She stopped wrestling the ocean and learned to sit beside the tide until it receded on its own. When she talks about food from that period, there's a softness that nearly breaks the heart. She doesn't cast it as a failure or a lapse in discipline. She describes it as an anchor tossed out in rough water. The smell of something simple and warm, the first bite tied to a memory of safety, the small sound of a spoon touching a bowl, these tiny rituals granted her mind a red light amid the traffic. For Hazal, eating wasn't a magic exit door. It was a way to return to a body that works and a spirit that refuses to snap. In the weeks when the online swarm was at its loudest, when public chatter reduced a person to a trending line, she chose to quit scrolling and start stirring. The quiet honesty of a simmering pot beat the neon hum of a screen. She learned the tempo of the stove, when to mix, when to step back, when to let something rest. She carried that rhythm into the rest of her life. Pause with me, Turkish Spotlight Secrets family. Hazal's candor about emotional eating is a kind of bravery many in this industry would sooner hide behind a wardrobe rack. Have you ever found comfort in a dish when life roared too loudly? Tell us what that food is and the memory it holds. By sharing, we turn this space into a gentle room where tenderness is allowed. If her resilience speaks to your story, press like so this message can reach someone who needs it. If you talk about Hazal long enough, another name surfaces on its own. Çağatay Ulusoy. And let's make one thing clear, this isn't about cheap gossip. It's about the gravity between two artists who understand the cost of the spotlight and the privilege of the craft. In the storm of 2022, echoes of their past on-screen magic followed Hazal everywhere, often twisted by critics as a weapon to dismiss what she was doing now. But away from the flash, no red carpets, no staged candids, Çağatay became something far steadier than electricity. He didn't step in with grand gestures. He showed up the way professionals and partners do when the world is a little too loud. He reminded her, without sweetness or spectacle, that the story was hers to tell. When Hazal felt herself collapsing into the pixelated caricature the internet was sketching, she would call him. He would guide the conversation back to concrete ground. What does the scene need from you, and what do you refuse to give away? Where is the arc bending, and where must you draw a boundary? Which piece of your heart belongs only to you? He wasn't granting permission. He was offering perspective. It wasn't a rescue. It was the trudging, respectful work of two people who know the heat of the lens and have learned how to stand up under it side by side. This internal renovation showed up openly on the set of The Eighth Family. Crew members noticed that something shifted, a calm flame replacing frantic energy. She stopped freezing at the mere idea of being judged in real time. She became measured, sure-footed, and surprisingly light. She stopped dragging an imaginary panel of jurors onto the set with her. Between takes she laughed for real, lifted a scene partner's mood with a quick smile, and then stepped back into the frame with clean, unbroken focus. When the slate clapped, she didn't sprint to her phone to see how the world ranked her. She checked in with the director, and then she checked in with herself. That wasn't a performance for a behind-the-scenes reel. It was discipline dressed as gratitude. Hazal says without flinching that there were days when reality wobbled out of shape, times when she weighed her value against the sentences typed by people she would never meet. Under that weight, patience became something she practiced, like scales at a piano. She let go of the need to win every argument and prioritized something more biological, sleeping through the night. She built small rituals that felt like fences and gardens at the same time. A quiet plate eaten as the sun faded. A ridiculous sitcom to rinse her mind after a day of drama. Long late-night talks with Çağatay about where the public figure stops and the human being begins. The outside world stayed loud. But inside, the noise lowered itself to a hum she could live with. And here we are, steady at the edge of a new chapter. The Eighth Family is more than a title dropped into a watch list. It's a flare fired into the sky by a woman who learned how to remain. Remaining with her craft when ridicule tried to chase her out. Remaining with her truth when fiction about her grew louder than facts. Remaining with herself when the crowd looked away. She didn't cross this distance alone. She did it with help, with time, with patience that looked a lot like love, and yes, with a fork in her hand and a favorite flavor on her tongue when the night stretched too long. Let's not reduce that confession to a quirky caption. It's an old truth wearing a new dress. A warm bowl won't fix the world's tangles or simplify a career with moving parts. But it can make surviving tonight possible. And survival, quiet, everyday survival, is sometimes the bravest story there is. Hazal shows us there is no shame in staying alive one meal, one breath, one scene at a time. As for Çağatay, his role in this story doesn't announce itself with flowers under camera flashes. It shows up in the steady questions that bring her back to solid ground. It arrives in calls that last long enough to turn panic into plans. It lives in the craft they share and the history they carry, the way two people can be a refuge for each other when the temperature rises. The public might hunger for a dramatic headline, but what they built was quieter and more interesting: trust. The kind of trust that lets a person step onto a set, tuck a stubborn strand of hair behind her ear, and act without the weight of an invisible courtroom pressing down on her chest. You could feel it on set days when the air felt heavy. Hazal would arrive early, script corners softened by use, and stand under the lights that never blink. She would leave the expectation of instant perfection at the door. She would plant her feet, breathe until the edges of the room came into focus, and play the scene with the kind of depth that can't be measured by hashtags. When the take wrapped, she would share a small joke, shake out her hands, and remind herself that the work is a conversation, not a verdict. And when old habits tried to return, the pull toward scrolling, the ache of needing to know what strangers thought, she would step into the kitchen at home and practice heat, patience, timing. Stir. Taste. Rest. Repeat. Fans watched the change without necessarily knowing the roots. They saw the calm in her eyes when she met questions head-on. They noticed that even in glamour, there was an ease that didn't look staged. It was the look of a person who knows that a bad day is still only one day long. It was the posture of someone who has built herself a place to stand where wind cannot knock her down for good. So as we close this chapter together, hold on to what matters in this story. The eighth family isn't simply another credit in a long filmography. It marks the end of a hard season and the start of one with more light in it. It's proof that you can be both fragile and formidable, both tender and unstoppable. It shows what happens when hard work is met by respect, when criticism is met by boundaries, when love, the durable kind, shows up not in words but in steady presence. That's what Hazal chose. That's what Çağatay offered. And that's how you stay. Thank you for walking through this with us on Turkish Spotlight Secrets. If Hazal Kaya's honesty brushed against something you've been carrying, share this video so its echo reaches someone else who needs gentleness today. Subscribe, hit like, and if you're able, tap join so we can keep telling the kind of stories that let people exhale. We can't do this without you. Until next time, be as generous with yourself as you are with everyone else. Whatever the day asks of you, remember that you don't have to face it alone. We're here, and so are the people who know how to listen, ask the right questions, and walk beside you when the lights feel a little too bright.